After finishing my second year in college, I stayed at my father's house in the countryside. The small forest behind the house was always my ideal retreat, where existence was uncomplicated. My father's wife, Clara, was so far from the average 59-year-old woman. She was intelligent and elegant, and had a natural aura of beauty that seemed effortless. Several years after my mother's death, she became my father's second wife. My father was content, but with Clara and myself, it was always different. I assumed that would be the case forever. I was wrong. One such day while walking, the sun was streaming through the trees in streaks of gold, and I headed towards the trail as I was used to. The trees were filled with the sound of cicadas and the gentle movement of leaves drowned by the wind. I was just about halfway to my favorite clearing when I suddenly heard footsteps behind me. When I turned around, I saw Clara in the sunlight with all its patterns upon her. "I thought I would come and keep you company," she said, her tone more an assurance than a statement devoid of the warmth and confidence that she possessed all the time. That was unexpected. Clara rarely came to the woods, and of course, never with me. All right," I replied and made a sign for her to come along. As soon as we arrived at the clearing, I plopped down on the weathered, moss-covered log that I had adored ever since I was a young child. Clara, however, took a little longer before she took her place next to me and was a little closer than I had thought. "It's lovely." She spoke quietly as she took in the trees and the sky for a long moment. "I understand why you enjoy this place so much." I replied with a nod, for I was in no position to respond. Although the silence that existed wasn't friendly either, it was rich with expectation, as if there were things to be said but weren't. "Chris," she started with a little bit of a pause, "I've been thinking a lot about this thing between us. You know, the way we never really, bonded." I did not anticipate her frankness. I stole a glance at her, noting the fleeting look of vulnerability across her technically stoic face. "I didn't think you were like that," I confessed. I just assumed it's difficult joining someone else's family." Clara chuckled lightly, almost in a melancholic tone rather than an amused one. "It is, but it's also difficult to remain on the periphery and experience the internal struggle of how to reach out. I've always wanted to know you more, but was always wary of intruding." That struck home. "I think I've equally felt the same thing," I replied. I never really understood what it is that you would want, so I kept my distance." There was silence once again, but this time it was different. It was less uncomfortable and more welcoming. Sometime later, Clara extended her hand and placed it gently on top of mine. The soft pressure of her skin caused me to jump in surprise. "I suppose what I mean is, I don't want us to continue the act of being strangers," she said as she looked into my eyes. "You're all grown up, Chris. An amazing young man, it seems, but I feel like I've lost out on actually knowing you." One of those things made me feel a certain weakness that could only be identified as a mixture of pride, confusion, and something deeper. My heart raced when her gaze fell upon me as she slightly leaned forward. "Clara," I began with the intent of getting my point across, but I could not find the words. She leaned in, her soft hand on my cheek, and before I knew it, I was kissing her. It was a gentle kiss, innocent and exploratory, but there was a depth to it which made everything else cease to exist. For a second, I lost my bearings, lost every other thought, except that of her lips, the softness and warmth of them, and the gentle pressure of her palm on my face. Once she came to, her eyes clouded with both wince and determination. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. I shouldn't have..." But I shook my head, not allowing her to complete her statement. No. My voice was more resolute than I had anticipated. I don't think it's bad. Her face lightened and a smirk appeared on her face. Neither do I, she said softly. That was the last of it. We spoke little of anything after this. The gap between us felt awkwardly loaded, but not hostile. Then, eventually, we got to our feet. Clara held my hand, which I allowed her to grip, and so we made our way through the woods to the exit, walking in such proximity that our bond was communicated without words. In the course of the next few days, that feeling of tension remained in the air, but it was not unwelcome. It was like a benchmark of empathy that had no words between us, a subtle connection that bonded us, both of us, without the effort, forcing, or denying it. The woods, which used to be my refuge for as long as I can remember, started to change in meaning. They were no longer just an escape. They were a common ground, where Clara and I had begun to look at each other in a different light. On one such evening, Clara came to join me yet again. By then it was not out of the ordinary. She started coming up with excuses to enter the woods whenever I was present, always with curiosity and quiet confidence. But this felt different. The sun was setting, making the surroundings heavy with its warmth, and everything was colored in gold. I was hoping I would catch up with you here, she said, approaching the glade where I was already seated, with that same protective, affectionate smile that formed a lump in my chest. She grinned. I assumed you would, I replied, feigning nonchalance, yet my heart was racing. I had given up on the charade of ignoring the fact that she affected my emotions. I just didn't know how to act on it. She made a slight move so that her fingers touched mine. I didn't know you adored me that much. We were there with our hands only slightly touching, but the air around us getting denser with each second. Eventually, Clara positioned herself next to me and lowered her voice. Sometimes, I ask myself if it was too late to say those words. I turned towards her and locked her gaze. It wasn't. I believe it's the right moment for us to say this. Her smile slightly grew wider and she came closer to me, her lips just touching mine. The kiss was soft, as hesitant as the very first one, but this time it had a different weight. A feeling of solace and companionship that was absent before. This time, I did not waste time. I returned her kiss, allowing myself to be consumed by that moment, enchanted by her warmth and the silkiness of her skin. When the two of us finally broke apart, Clara pressed her forehead into mine and exhaled onto my skin, heat emanating from her breath. Chris, she said in a whisper, I have no idea where this is heading, but I'd be very devastated if it were to slip away. In the weeks that followed, the bond between Clara and I became closer, in a manner that fits and baffles at the same time. We didn't hasten anything, we didn't have to. We built our bond in thoughtful conversations and shared experiences, in a sense that we were working on and not with verbal language. It was late in the night when Dad went to sleep. On the back porch, Clara found me. The temperature was fair, and above us shone the stars. Forever. She sat next to me with our shoulders touching, and for a beat, we both forgot about the existence of everything else and looked up at the sky. Have you ever thought... She paused, contemplating her words. About what we do with this. How do we keep it ours? I turned toward her, eyeballing. I won't wish Dad to feel pain, but I don't want to pretend I'm not in love with you. She reached for my hand, lacing her fingers together with mine. Whatever happens, Chris, I need you to know that this means something to me. You mean something to me, she stated boldly. I held her hand tenderly. You mean something to me too, Clara. More than you can imagine. These words softened her eyes, and a moment later, she came forward and kissed me in a way that spoke that there was so much more to us.